Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. Lots of people. I didn't expect all those people. Sorry. Is it better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry to say that Mr. De Bortoli could not come, but I will try to welcome everybody of you in the name of the Fondazione Corriere della Sera. You know that the Fondazione makes a number of events, and I think this one will be particularly important and particularly, I think, beautiful. Thank you to the people who are here. Thank you to the people who are in connection with us from India and from Boston. I will start immediately, and I will give the floor, the podium actually, to the president of the Associazione Italia-India, Ms. Marcegaglia. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Fondazione Corriere della Sera for accepting to host and co-sponsor our seminar today. Many thanks also to all the speakers that are here with me, and also the one who will be connected with us, and also thanks to you, to the audience. As Mr. Taino said, it's a lot of people here. We are very happy. And also, of course, welcome also to the people who are watching the event from India and from the United States. As it has been said, our association, so Association of India and Italy for Cooperation and Partnership, was founded 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago,
Just
actually.
about, a bit more.
Yeah. And it has been founded by, I would say, a prominent group of Italian companies, business people, and representatives also from academic, media, civil society, and cultural world. And our association takes the pride in its effort to promote a better understanding and also to broaden the scope of cooperation between India and Italy, highlighting priorities and new opportunities, as well as addressing the generalization and stereotypes that, as you know, are numerous, that continue to affect our mutual perception. Our initiatives provide, we hope, qualified insights on our respective culture, society, and world's view, in addition to our shared economic priorities. Of course, on this part, we are working a lot also between Italian companies, Indian companies. We have organized, I think I can say, a very interesting CEO dialogue between Italian and Indian CEOs, where also some interesting common projects are going on. But as you can understand, we also work a lot on the cultural part, because we think it is very important also, this part. So, as I said, we work on economic part, cultural part, societal part. Of course, our association has, of course, has had a kind of downturn in its activity forced by the COVID pandemic in the last couple of years. But now we can say that we have resumed a full program of high-level events, seminars, and forums. We believe that the essential foundation of our beneficial relationship lies in expanding the basis of our mutual knowledge and encouraging a better reciprocal understanding. And so we are very happy to note, as I said before, that when we normally do this, our initiatives, we have a lot of people as today, and normally this exceeds also our expectation. It means that there is a lot of also interest in understanding and having this better knowledge of our cultures. Today's seminar, India, G20 and Global South, we look at the more recent developments in India's policy and world view. So, of course, Italy and India have shared the experience of the G20 presidency. Italy was 2021 and India 2022. And also I had the honor also to chair the B20 Italy in 2021. That is the business community of the G20 presidency. And India, I think, is called and also wants to do that upon to play an increasingly pivotal role in a fraught international situation, and we know this very well, from the global south to BRICS, from China to Ukraine and Gaza, from the rupture of the international economy to the crossed lines of political realignment in an increasingly challenged world order. So we think our panel, that is a very distinguished panel of speakers, will address all these points. And I'm sure that the conversation will be very interesting and very useful also in a moment like this. So I'm sure that we will have a very fruitful Indo-Italian exchange from which I am sure that we all will benefit. Thank you very much, and we start our work.
Thank you, Ms. Marcegaglia. I think Ambassador Armellini wants to make a brief introduction.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. And we are very happy to see such a large crowd here this afternoon. My name is Antonio Armellini. I'm the Executive Vice Chairman of AIICP, and I have spent a significant part of my professional life in India, which doesn't mean I learned anything, but I tried to do my best. India has grown in a very significant way in the international scene. As Emma Marcegaglia said, we shared G20 presidencies in the last years, and this led to a mutual rediscovery of our importance and interest. Our bilateral relations are on a high right now, but we need to do more to understand each other, understand our societies, priorities, culture, perception, idiosyncrasies, because this is the only basis on which we'll be able to set the strategic cooperation in our economic relations we have set as a priority on firm ground, because unless we understand each other better, it is difficult to cooperate successfully and move ahead as we both, I think, intend to do. And this, of course, is one of the things which AIICP plans to do. And as was said, seminars like this kind, we hope will be of interest and will allow us to move forward in our mutual understanding in a small way, but in a way which I hope will be helpful anyway. Having said this, I mean, of course, the remit of this evening discussion is huge, and I don't wish to cover all points, but let me perhaps just put a few questions so that to start or kick off the discussion in a way, and of course, then which will then take the course which the speakers will themselves decide. Well, I think we should start looking at India. I mean, I think the collapse of the bipolar East-West order, which happened with the end of the Cold War, which was followed by the brief illusion of a unipolar world based on a sort of Pax Americana, has produced the conclusion of a great fragmentation of the international system, which is still looking around to see how, in fact, it can find new equilibriums and new forms of alignment. But it has also, at the same time, brought forth a number of new players on the international scene. One of which is the new Global South, a diverse group of countries of which India has claimed to assume a leading role. The first question I ask is, what exactly is the new Global South? Is it for real? Is it a fly-by-night operation? Or is it a harbinger of change which will help redefine the way in which international relations work and the international system structures itself? Well, this is something in which I think there are different views. I mean, you will find skeptics in Italy, you will find enthusiasts in India, and it'll be interesting to see what we all think about this. Similarly, I think we can ask ourselves a similar question as far as another group is concerned, a group called BRICS, a strange name which meant Brazil, Russia, India, and China. A group of countries which set itself in some years ago as the new focus for non-East, non-West, but non-adversarial economic relationship in the world. BRICS has now been broadened in its scope, and India again is a founding member of BRICS. Is India really interested in pursuing BRICS as a priority? Is an enlarged BRICS with countries like Iran amongst its members an association which serves India's interests, or does it serve essentially those of China? We mentioned China because both in terms of Global South and in terms of BRICS, China is the alternative leader. When China, as well as India, stakes a claim to leadership of this part of the world. So it would be interesting to know, I mean, how we think of this and how the Indians look at the way in which this is developed, because the Global South, BRICS, may in fact call for a redefinition of how we look at ourselves in the world. Is it true that we are facing a series of groupings which are not East-West, not North-South, not pro-West, but not contrary to the West? Different. What does different mean? And how does this apply to a situation which is changing? How does this apply also to India and to its foreign policy? India has always prided itself with an international foreign policy. Many partners, no allies. How does this gel with the visible improvement in the relations between India and some of the major players of the West, the United States in particular? And how does it play with the reassessment which is India's making of its strategic perception in the area and beyond? Security cooperation with the United States has grown considerably. Security cooperation with European countries is also growing. Italy is not necessarily a part of this, but perhaps I think might, and indeed to my extent, and to my mind, should be a part and not yet. Now, how does this come into play with the traditional line of an Indian policy which was, again, not aligned, open, but completely separate from the definitions of partnership or established partnerships? Is this compatible with a different security perception? Is this compatible with a situation which is changing in the world? Is this compatible with the role of China in this part of the world and the fact that China, having been the historical competitor of India throughout its history, India and China have never signed a peace treaty. I mean, they're still technically at war, although they have the largest amount of bilateral trade in absolute terms. How does this relate to the way in which India looks at itself? How does it relate, in particular, to the way in which India is looking at its own strategic perceptions in terms of security threat in the region and not only in the region? I say not only in the region because India, claiming to be a power with world ambitions, cannot afford to take a soft line on issues which are of crucial relevance to us, such as the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza, on both of which India has taken a position of wait and see, not involving themselves, not criticizing, but not involving themselves. In particular, of course, as far as this is particularly significant in relation to Russia. Russia is the old trusted friend of India. Is India really happy to see India really happy to see Russia possibly turning into a satellite of Beijing? Is that the way in which it sees its security perceptions moving? Is the relationship with the United States a response to this? Is there a regional answer possible? Well, these are all questions which go very far, but I think they're all of interest and are of relevance to our discussion. Finally, just a very brief point. Indo-Italian relations, as I said, economically are definitely on a high. It would be interesting to have on our discussion, but sort of an overview of how we look at the way in which it will develop, what the problems are, what the opportunities may be, and see how we can move about in this respect as well. And all this at a time where both India and Italy are facing complicated election times, which will impact in their own domestic situations, and also I think in the way in which they cooperate with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador. A lot of questions, a lot of issues that I'm quite sure that the discussion, the conversation today will be particularly lively. And my role here is today of a facilitator much more than a moderator, because I don't intend to limit or to restrict the discussion. Ambassador Armellini and Ms. Marcegaglia already have drawn the framework of our discussion, and so I will start immediately. The debate will begin with a question to each of our distinguished panelists, and then there will be a discussion among them. That, I mean, it will be a second round of speeches, and then maybe we will have some time left for a few questions from the public. I will start with Ms. Manjeet Kripalani. Manjeet Kripalani is the Executive Director and co-founder of Gateway House at the Indian College of Global Relations. Previously, she was a journalist with, among other publications, Business Week and Forbes. Ms. Kripalani, thank you for being here. I know that in India now is night, so you've been very kind, absolutely, to be with us right now. I have seen an interview a few weeks ago, an interview by Narendra Modi, your Prime Minister, to the Financial Times, where he says, our nation is on the cusp of takeoff. What's he meaning with this sentence? Do you think that he is speaking about the international influence of India, or do you think he is speaking about the economy and of the domestic politics?
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here with some new friends and old friends. Now, how much time do I have to answer that question? Because I'm going to start out with a little bit of India's political slogans. When Mr. Modi says we're on the cusp of change, so I'm going to give you a series of slogans that started up our political slogans that have defined our elections. So starting in for 40 years, between 1947 and 1991, the slogan was Roti, Kapra, Makan, which is food, clothing, shelter. In 1991, when we liberalized our economy, that changed to more than the basics. Bijli, Sarak, Pani, electricity, roads, and water. And that's because foreign investment came in, Indian companies were able to compete, and political call to action changed to providing infrastructure for the markets. That ran its course for the decade, and the Great Indian Quadrilateral Road Project was built, and many of you will have traveled on that. And then the next election had a different kind of aspirational tone, and that slogan was Shiksha, Vikas, Udyog, which is education, development, and industry. That was the time when India's IT industry and outsourcing industry caught attention. And that's when Indians started going to school. Today, there are 200 million Indians enrolled in school, in high school. And I think at this point, almost every Indian child will have received at least 8 years of school, if not 10. This changed again. By the time Mr. Modi had been elected in 2014, the pace of change of these slogans had picked up, and it became very ambitious. So he called it Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which is with all, development for all. In his next election, he added 2 more words. It was with all, development for all, and with faith from all, which is Sabka Vishwas. And this was particularly addressed to the accusations faced by the BJP that it ignored the needs of the minorities, and this includes the Muslims and the very much neglected tribal community. Now it's 2024, and the one thing that has happened is that the Indian electorate has now started to expect that all the manifesto promises are going to be met. So this time, the election slogan has been made even before the campaigning, and it is with all, development for all, with faith for all, and the last one is Sabka Prayas, which means with effort from all. In short, the government has done the work, and it's time for ordinary Indians to put their shoulder to the wheel and to achieve the final goal of becoming a developed nation by 2047. That will be exactly 100 years after independence. So I would say that India really is on the cusp. But what has happened, it's always a three-legged stool, right? There's the government, there's the corporate sector, and there's the citizen. It used to be in the early days, maybe in the 90s, it was the private citizen and the corporate sector that was at work. Now, for the last 10 years, it's been the government and the citizen at work. The corporate sector needs to now put their shoulder to the wheel because the government has invested very heavily in capital expenditure this past decade. And it has boosted the infrastructure, connectivity, etc. So in 23, 24, the government will spend about $133 billion on capital expenditure, and this has been up 33% every subsequent year. This will be maintained this year, as we'll see in the upcoming budget. And so the new base for India's growth, which used to be the Hindu rate of growth, 2.5%, is now 7%. That is extremely ambitious, and it is expected to carry through for the next 5 years. I have seen India at 9.5% growth, and Ambassador Armellini, so have you. I expect 9%, and for two reasons. One, the Indian corporate sector is sitting on piles of cash and they're not spending it. That is going to start to happen out of sheer pressure of competition. And as more foreign investors and companies roll into India, we've had, I think, about $70 billion in FDI in 2023. And this is true especially as companies diversify away from China. Secondly, the momentum of 1.4 billion people who now see achievable aspirations, and they are going to push everything forward, from innovation to eco-friendly consumerism. All this is by a highly digitized population, the world's largest after China. We have not even begun to see the beginning of this velocity. So, I mean, I could just add a couple of words on India's G20 if you'd like me to. Do I have time?
Yeah.
Okay, so you could see a lot of this growth and optimism and confidence visible in India's G20 presidency year. India had never ever hosted a major global or multilateral event before, and certainly not for a whole year. We had Bollywood Filmfare Awards, but those are very small. And the Asian Games in 1982. But India managed its G20 well. We hosted, as you know, over 200 events in 40 cities, and it wasn't as perfect as Italy's G20. You did a phenomenal job. And most Indians really couldn't tell, had never heard of the G20. They couldn't tell if it was a new model of a one-day cricket match. But suddenly the government has learned on the job. And Indian innovation, which is digital public infrastructure, was on display for all to adopt. And this carries the Indian stamp of being affordable, accessible, adaptable, and appropriate. And Ambassador, you were asking the global south, what really will define that model? It is really this Indian stamp, AAAA. And this was on display through DBI in the G20. And by bringing the African Union into the G20, a global south nation bringing in another global south nation into the circle of the select, I mean, this enabled the consensus of the Delhi Declaration, and for a very short time, it made us all feel the world has united. And talking about China, getting the AU into the G20 does not automatically give India leadership of the global south. There are many, many contenders for that position. As you mentioned, there's China, and now there's also Russia, Turkey, and Brazil. They all have their limitations, and so does India. So to be a light for the global south, India has to do more than just have global south leaders summits, that are virtual. We have to ensure that our successful experiences of poverty alleviation, which are considerable. We just had a report out that 250 million Indians have risen out of multi-dimensional poverty in the last decade. We've also got digital independence. This is shared, these aspirations are shared by other developing countries. So really for India I don't think India wants to be a leader of the global south, as it were. We have the pressure of 1.4 billion. But what we can do is set the right example. And the way to do it is to domestically strengthen and expand our academic and intellectual institutions in the research and study of these experiences. We have to dramatically increase the funding and scope of our aid programs, and multilaterally, we have to work with partners like Brazil and the OECD countries like Italy and Japan to experiment and replicate and partner with these experiments in the global south.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kripalani. So it is an issue of international and domestic challenges,
Yes.
if I understand correctly. Okay.
And
Now,
also opportunities that have been seized.
sure. Okay, now to Mr. Jorge Heine. Mr. Heine, Ambassador actually Heine, is now professor at the Boston University. He has been a member of the cabinet in the government of Chile. He has been also a former ambassador of Chile to India, to China, and to South Africa. So if you want to speak about Global South, about China, about India, about South Africa in general, Global South, please make a call to Ambassador Heine and you will be sure to have a good answer. Speaking of Global South, Ambassador, is it correct to use this name, this terminology, given the differences and divisions among the countries that are part of the so-called Global South? And how do you see the role of India within these movement, if you want to call that, or in particular within the BRICS Plus?
Great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to the Italy-India Association and to the Corriere della Sera and to my good friend Ambassador Armellini for inviting me to speak in this panel. India is a country very close to my heart, so it's a real privilege to do so. Let me preface this by saying the following. India, of course, is a civilization state, a continent more than a country that has been growing at very high rates for the past 30 years, a cradle of religions. And this significance, I would argue, has not fully translated into the sort of international influence a country with those features should really have. We are really only starting to get a sense of how India's influence will project itself in the world. And my second point is that this is not by happenstance, but rather by choice. A colleague of mine here at Boston University, Manjari Miller, has written that India until now has been basically a reluctant power. For a variety of reasons, it has prioritized its own internal challenges, its domestic developments, to lift its population out of poverty, and has not done necessarily for much of this previous time the needful to project itself on the international scene. To give you only one number that I find very revealing, last time I looked, this may have changed a bit recently, but the total number of foreign service officers in the Ministry of External Affairs of India is around 900. Now, to give you an idea, my own country, Chile, with a population of 19 million, has 500 foreign service officers. Brazil has 4,000. China has 9,000. The United States has 12,000. It is very difficult, I would argue, to project yourself on, the global stage with such a small diplomatic corps, foreign service officers. Now, what I would say, though, is that this reluctance of India to project itself on international affairs in the past 2 years has been changing. And we are seeing a very different type of India on the world stage. And here I would like to pick up on what was said by my good friend Manjeet before me. What we have seen, and particularly I would focus on the G20. I was in Delhi shortly before the G20 summit was held. And, I remember having a sense of the conversations that were being held. A lot of people were very skeptical that India would pull off the G20 summit. Summits in general, not just the G20, are measured by two things. One of them, who actually participates, which leaders go, and from, what countries they hail from. And second, by a final declaration. Mr. Putin announced that he wasn't going to go. Mr. Xi announced that he wasn't going to go. And at some point, it was touch and go whether President Biden would actually attend because his wife had COVID. And there was a lot of skepticism as to whether there was going to be, in fact, a final statement given the differences over Ukraine. In the end, the G20 summit in Delhi was a great success. There was a final statement. President Biden did attend. The African Union was invited to join as a full member. And, by and large, it's considered a big feather in India's diplomatic cap. So I would argue that was a very significant turning point for Indian diplomacy and has positioned India in the world in a way that had not been the case before. Now, let me now turn to the question of the Global South. I would argue very strongly that the year 2023 was a year in which the Global South really came into its own. And this is not independent of this international projection that I've mentioned before about India. In the course of the past 2 years, we have had a series of events that have positioned the Global South in a way that was not the case before. And in all of them, India has played a significant role, confirming this, very leading role that India is playing now in the Global South and across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The first event, was of course, the war in Ukraine. As we all know, India is part of the Quad, which some people refer to as an Asian NATO, although that's a bit exaggerated, I would say. And the expectation was that India would stand very much behind the position of the West and of NATO in the war in Ukraine. India did not do that. And in fact, it has refused to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in fact, has increased considerably its purchases of Russian oil, much of the chagrin of the West. India saw no reason to simply toe the Western line. And there are, historical important reasons why that is the case. Russia has been traditionally, in its previous incarnation as well as the Soviet Union, closely tied to India. And, there are strong reasons why India should take the stance it did. But I would argue that it was also important in that sense that this matched also the reaction of many countries around the world that, although condemning the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, at the same time refused to make this into a sort of global war, which some Western countries wanted to do by establishing some sort of global boycott of Russia and making this into the first truly global war. This is a European war, and many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America see no reason why they should be and become a part of it. And India, of course, has played a very significant role in that. Number two, of course, there's the issue of BRICS expansion. I followed the development of the BRICS as a group for obvious reasons very closely, and I've been fascinated to see how the initial, criticism of the BRICS group by many Western think tanks and by the media, dismissing it as just a talk shop that really didn't mean much. Well, suddenly there was a bank, the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank, headquartered in Shanghai with $50 billion worth of capital that's been well evaluated by credit rating agencies and by the media. So it is obviously no longer a talk shop. And now with the BRICS expansion that was announced in Johannesburg last August, we are now talking no longer about 6 countries, we're talking about 11 countries, some of them quite significant economies, although, under President Milei, Argentina ultimately declined the invitation to join, but still, we're talking about, a very significant number of countries that now make this up. And, to give you only one example of this, how important it is, even before the expansion, in PPP terms, the GDP of the 5 BRICS countries was bigger than that of the G7. And now, of course, much more so with the incorporation of these new members. The G7 represents around 10% of the world's population. We're talking about the BRICS. We're talking, 45, 46%. We're talking different numbers here. So the BRICS is here to stay. And those who underestimate it do so at their peril. And of course, the third instance of this emergence of the Global South is what is happening in Gaza, where the United States and Israel have seen themselves in a very small minority in various votes at the United Nations General Assembly, in which the vast majority of countries around the world, but particularly those from the Global South, have taken a very strong stance in favor of a ceasefire and stop what is happening in Gaza. And finally, and to end this, let me say the following. I'm fascinated by a certain reaction that I have seen think tanks in Washington, in London, elsewhere, denying the very existence of the Global South. They say it's a pernicious word. It should be retired. I mean, if you ask for the retirement of the word, you are, asking for essentially denying the existence. How can you deny the existence of, this group of countries across the developing world, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, that has become a real force? India has held two meetings on the Global South. There was a meeting of something called the G77 plus China in Havana in September, another expression of the Global South. Now, what I will say on this, the Global South represents countries that until now have basically been excluded from the liberal international order that has existed since the end of World War II. And they feel that they need to have a bigger say, a bigger role in the running of the world. Given the wealth shift that we have seen from the North Atlantic to the Asia Pacific in the course of the past 30 years or so, the most dynamic and fastest growing part of the world today is in East Asia, yet they are not represented the way they should in various international organizations, be it the UN, be it the Bretton Woods institutions, and they feel they want a place at the table. And as I said earlier, in the course of the past 2 years, the Global South has emerged with great force. And yes, there are differences among them, as there are differences among various other groups. But if we look at, United Nations General Assembly votes, if we look at various conferences that are taking place, if we look at entities like the BRICS, we'll see that to attempt to deny their existence is pretty much a fool's errand. The Global South is here with us to stay. India plays an important role within it. Yes, there is competition there between China and India, but that doesn't mean those differences cannot be resolved. We're talking here about the two Asian giants that will continue to play a very significant role in international affairs in years and decades to come. Let me finish with the following. In addition to all its significant assets that have been highlighted by previous speakers, India can play a very significant role. In many ways, it holds sort of the balance in the balance of power in international affairs, located as it is in South Asia with its size and having the sort of very good relations it has, both with Washington and with Moscow. There are few countries that are in such a strategically significant position to aim for a better world and also to stand up for the rights of those in the Global South that until now have been ignored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We will come back to the Global South and to the BRICS later on, probably. But just quickly, I have a question. If I understand correctly, you don't think that the international disorder now is between democracies and dictators or autocracies. You understand, you believe in something more complex and more and different.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the argument has been made that it has been made in relation to the war in Ukraine, that the biggest cleavage, the most significant cleavage in today's world is between democracy and autocracy, between democracy and dictatorships. The implication being that those that back Russia would be authoritarians, those that back the Ukraine are democracies. Well, it doesn't quite jibe with reality. India is the biggest democracy in the world. It is not sided with Ukraine. Pakistan, Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, these are, very significant democracies around the world. They are not siding with Ukraine. So I would argue that the biggest cleavage in today's world, and one that has become apparent in the past couple of years, is between North and South, is between the global North and the global South. And that, it seems to me, is what will determine the course of international affairs in years to come. Projections indicate that by 2050, 7 of the top 10 economies in the world will be non-Western. So that is something we ought to keep in mind. And among the top 3 would be China, India, and the United States. Thank you.
Yes, probably in a different order, but we'll see that. And now, Nicola Missaglia. Nicola Missaglia is a research fellow at the India desk of S.p.A. S.p.A. is the Institute for International Policy Studies in Milan, and he has a master's degree at Sciences Po Paris. Mr. Missaglia, how do you see, from a European viewpoint, India's foreign policy, the absence of formal alliances with other countries, with other organizations, the good relationship with Washington, but at the same time the good relation with... Oh, that's okay. But also with Russia and with the European countries, the approach to Russia and the Ukraine war. Is this a limit for the Indian foreign policy in European eyes, or do you think it is well understood?
Well, no, it is not well understood, and we have seen that in the reaction Europeans as well as the United States have had to India's substantial non-alignment policy in this in the Ukraine-Russia case. What we should say is that India has been, still is, quite coherent to its historical approach to international relations. However, from a non-aligned country, from a leader in non-aligned policy, it has now become, the Indians define it as a multi-aligned country. Meaning that India is following its own interests. It doesn't, let's say, really care if these interests are not aligned with their partners or with their friends or with, let's say, consensus in international relations. However, we have seen that over the last 3 years, 2 years, when India has had the G20 presidency last year, India's international standing has grown that much that the West and Europe, including Europe, has shifted its focus from criticism towards India and its non-aligned policy towards a sort of courting India, since everyone is aware that from an economic and geopolitical point of view, India has become a strategic country in Asia and in the world. US-China tensions have grown over the last years, and this makes the West look at India as a potential, as a necessary, actually, necessary ally in economic relations and geopolitical relations. For those who have followed India over the last decades, and over the last decade, since Modi, for example, is in the government, even the narrative of India in the West and in Europe has changed very much. In the beginning, 2014, when Modi was elected for the first time, the main account of India, of the Modi government, was focusing on Hindu nationalism, on human rights, on what would happen with this new government. There is no talk of this anymore in the West and in Europe, since India's relevance has become that important now that we need India as an ally. However, we should be aware in Europe and in the US that India is still not willing to become a formal ally of the West, nor of other countries. It is coherent with its own approach of non-alignment. What the West should do, I think, and Europe especially, is to offer India opportunities for growth in exchange for more, let's say, confidence from India's part, since this is India's approach to international relations more. We have met Minister of External Affairs of India, Subramaniam Jaishankar, a few months ago, and this was exactly his approach in Italy. Said, I mean, what does the West offer to India right now? Economic opportunities, non-economic opportunities, geopolitical opportunities. We should not expect, I think, India to shift on the Western side right now for the coming years. However, India is willing to engage with the West. We should be aware that India will do it in a very transactional way. So what can you give us, and what can we offer to you? We have seen that clearly in the Russia-Ukraine approach, where India has been buying the Russian energy. Europe is not buying anymore, is not willing to buy anymore, and India is even selling the energy, the refined energy, back to Europe. So we see it's a very pragmatic approach, and it's actually an approach several countries, even in the global south, are adopting right now towards the West. Yeah, I think that's my assessment for the time being.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Missaglia. Now we should speak a little bit about the security issues with Manoj Joshi, that is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. He is a very famous newspaper commentator, and he specialized in security issues. Mr. Joshi, one of the most puzzling issues to me is the relationship between Delhi and Beijing. How is the situation right now, not only in bilateral terms, but also more widely within the Indo-Pacific basin? And can you also tell us something about the informal collaboration on security within the Quad? The Quad is formed by India, United States, Australia, and Japan. And how is it seen from Delhi?
Good evening. It's a great privilege for me to address this gathering on India, G20 and the Global South, organized by the AIICP and the Fondazione Corriere della Sera. I would also like to thank my good friend, Ambassador Antonio Armellini, for this privilege. I will speak on security dimension of India's approach arising from G20 and the Global South. And to answer your question on China right at the outset, situation's not good. The relationship is I would say, in a condition of new Cold War as such. In the sense, India is taking an even tougher stand against China than is being taken by the United States at this stage. In any case, let me get on with what I wanted to say. Today, the flames of war in West Asia and Myanmar are lapping literally on India's shores. Other threats are also there, new domains of warfare, cyber, electromagnetic, space, information. They are confronting us 24/7. As it is, the Chinese challenge hangs over our security. This is exemplified by an unresolved standoff with China along the line of actual control. There are indications that far from stabilizing, the situation along the line of actual control remains, in the words of our army chief recently, he said it is sensitive. Both sides are upgrading their facilities and deployments and probing each other's positions along that undefined line called the line of actual control. It's not agreed to by either side, so it's a very peculiar kind of a border. The threat of a major war may be remote, but there's every chance that a local situation can slide into a larger skirmish. As for our old adversary, Pakistan, it may be down and out, but that has not lessened the challenge that it has been posing along what is called the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. Again, that's not a recognized border, but it's called the line of control, and the unrecognized border with China is called the line of actual control. Even though declining defense, even though our defense expenditures are declining, they account for 13% of our central government's expenditure, and it's the largest amongst all the ministries. Now, the Modi government has spent a huge amount of money on civilian infrastructure and welfare measures, meaning that has been part of its policy. But it has also taken some tough and some would say drastic measures to curb defense expenditure. They want to control defense expenditure because though India is a major importer of arms and weapons system, it has always sought to spend the least it could for defense, meaning this has been a kind of an internal philosophy that most of the money available should go for development and for welfare measures. Now, this philosophy is also reflected in current trends where our defense expenditure as a percentage of the GDP is now gone below 2%. And India also has a great desire to be a manufacturer of its own weapons and a major exporter. As for external intervention, meaning I'm looking at India, this it's a more assertive India, but India is very careful about any issue of external intervention. This is because of the very bad experience we had with an intervention in Sri Lanka in the 1980s. So I think now India has a very clear position that it will only undertake such actions under the auspices of the United Nations. This does not, of course, include humanitarian relief measures with which we'll associate with whoever is available. This is reflected currently in India, this posture is reflected currently in India operating by itself in the Gulf of Aden and not participating in the US-led effort. Even though India is a member of the Combined Marine Forces in Bahrain, which is led by the US. But India is operating its own mission in the Gulf of Aden. India's mantra is partnership. That is what it's looking for with the US, UK, France, for that matter, Russia or Italy. India is a nuclear weapons power, and with a large military, it does not seek a relationship with the US on account of security. unlike other American partners like Japan, South Korea, or Western Europe, because there the US is their principal security provider. So India doesn't really need that kind of a relationship. As for the global South, my own view is that it's a rhetorical device. The term global South may resonate in current geopolitics, but it does remain somewhat substantively nebulous. It manifests itself in various organizations like African Union, League of Arab States, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation. Of course, New Delhi has self-consciously projected itself as a leader of the global South grouping while chairing the G20 last year. But this was more by way of emerging as a bridge of sorts between the developed countries and the global South. As our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said in Nigeria recently, the global agenda today is on promoting rebalancing and multipolarity, thereby restoring the world to its natural diversity. India's approach to the international system is that it is seeking a multilateral international order in which India will be one of the poles, and its diplomacy and security policy work in that direction. As of now, you will agree that Indian pursuit is bearing fruit and India is being seen as a major global power. Not surprisingly, its primary rival here for the affections of the global South is China. Even as India reaped the benefit of G20 last year, China responded by moving to expand BRICS as its instrument of choice, meaning a lot of the new expanded countries were on account of China. For the moment, India is now substantially aligned with the US, meaning I say substantially aligned with the US, though as I said, we are not allied to the US, but it can be termed as a Western state geopolitically. This manifests itself in its association with the Quad and its relationships with Japan, Australia in the Western Pacific, France and UAE in the Western Indian Ocean. India's Western alignment is not a permanent feature. New Delhi has always sought to be its own pole in what it says ought to be a multilateral international order. Hence, its insistence on maintaining good ties with Russia and Iran. The Western orientation is occasioned by an opportunistic desire to take advantage of China's estrangement with the West and to obtain Western investment and technology, which India thinks is very important for its own development purposes. What has held India back till now has been its economy. It's just not functioned, it's not played the kind of role, for example, that the Chinese economy has played. Now there are expectations that all restraints on the economy have eased and the country is poised for a period of sustained and high economic growth, which will also translate into enhanced military capacity. So this is the perspective, in my view, with which India is looking at the global South, as well as the G20, its relationship. And as I said, they sees the G20 as a bridge between the global North and the global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will come back to the issue of security in a few minutes. Now, Dr. Aimone di Savoia Aosta. Dr. di Savoia Aosta è Head of Institutional and Regulatory Affairs della Pirelli and Company. He is an expert in international affairs. He knows, he knows very well India, and he's an expert also in corporate strategies. So, Dr. Savoia Aosta, India and Italy, India and Europe relations are growing in economic terms every year, probably also in political terms in some way. And speaking of Italy, for example, the relationship between Modi and Draghi was quite good, and now the relationship between Modi and Meloni is even better. How do you see from a corporate point of view the opportunities to have a good relationship with India and investing in India? How is India changing in your eyes?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here today. Very happy to participate to this very interesting discussion. If I see it from the business point of view, I have to point out the first important thing to say is that when we speak about Global South, about BRICS, that means we're speaking about blocks. So this is really not good for business, because business preferred the old global world that was much more simple to rule in. But having said this, geopolitics determines the business, and we have to understand this is a different way of doing business today. Luckily, then if we come to India and Europe are not in opposite blocks, which is the positive news. And as a matter of fact, especially Italy and India are growing in business. So from 7 billion of global turnover exchange we had after COVID, we passed to 14, which is, I mean, still small numbers, but very interesting growth, as a matter of fact. So I see it as very positive, and seeing it from Italy, seeing it from Europe. And within Europe, I think we have a fourth country that trades with India. But if you take out, I think, Belgium and the Netherlands, which are basically gems and stones, I think we have a second. So very positive. Then, as it was said before by other speakers, there are two dimensions. There's the international dimension and the domestic dimension. And we see this with business, with India as a very different parterre in which we act. If I take the international one, I was speaking about globalization before. We still enjoy high and very good relation with Indian groups, and we do business all around the world, for example, in supply of raw materials, and this goes on with the old positive spirit. Luckily, we have the same footprint, I mean, of blocks today. So, I mean, where we produce, we are working, and this works very well. When we speak about the domestic footprint instead, we see India developing is incredible. I think it has the highest kilometers per day built of roads. So, I mean, is a very good prospective market. For us, is still quite small. We work in the premium segment arena, which in case of tires mean 18 inches up. So we still are not able to look at it as a perspective to produce. But what we see, that there still are some barriers. For example, in tires, there's import license that does limit business, and this is not positive. So we see it. We see growth. We see positive environment for the growth. We see an international network that works, but we also see barriers which business doesn't like, as a general statement. Having said this, I mean, we still are looking at it with a lot of interest, and I hope we'll get deeper into the development of India.
Do you see India as a serious alternative to China right now? I understand that it is a little bit too much to ask that, but...
Well, so, yeah, complicated. I hope you asked about but no. Well, listen, so for me it's very simple. From the automotive industry, China is still far ahead compared to India. This doesn't mean India has, as it was said, it has a larger development ahead, most probably, but today China in the production of electric vehicles is ahead not only of India, but of a big part of the world. And this in this block economy creates some problems to Europe and to other countries.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kripalani, I hope to say your name in the correct way. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that the reforms that Mr. Modi made, also the infrastructure investments that he made, and also the foreign policy towards the Global South is a bipartisan issue in India. I understand that it's not easy to speak about bipartisan because now Modi is really probably the only game in town. But what do you think that the rest of India thinks about that?
No, absolutely. It is bipartisan, and it is quite widely accepted by Indians across the board, including our young population. This young population of India has actually they're quite different. They have not seen the India of the past, but they're very much exposed to to the world, to social media, etc. And they see what's going on in other parts of the world. They see how the West behaves and reacts, and they also see they feel a committee with other parts of the world that look like India. And so I would say they are the young voters. They are Mr. Modi's voters, and he when he projects the world, he really talks to young people in a way that is sympathetic and empathetic. He runs a radio show every month, and he talks to young people about all the things that are going on in India, but also that are going on in the world. Yesterday, or day before yesterday, he understood he had a sign up because young people are sitting for exams. These young Indians are very ambitious. They all sit for exams all the time, and they're very stressed out about it. So he had a long conversation with them online about how to deal with the stress for exams. Now, the rest of the world is watching this, and our young Indians watch this, and they have more in common with the global South than they do with the global North. And even though there are more Indians today studying in the United States and more Indians coming to Italy and to Europe to study, that is looked as gaining a technical education and sometimes jobs, but really to gain a technical education so they can get a leg up. So I would say it is bipartisan, yes, and it is also social. They're not colonization's generation. They are a generation that has seen a free India. They were born, 20 years ago, maybe even less. They see a world that is filled with their peers who looks like them, and they identify with people that are like them.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to be a little bit shorter because the time is running out. Ambassador Heine, I have a quick question about always about BRICS, particularly BRICS Plus. Okay, you already spoke about the differences and the situation, but I have an example that I would like you to comment. Tehran is entering the BRICS. Tehran, I mean Iran. And yeah. Tehran is, let me say, an international troublemaker. Could it create a major problem within BRICS Plus, a situation like this? Or do you think this is not important for the BRICS Plus?
Great question. The way I see it, Iran has significant economic troubles for a variety of reasons, including the various embargoes that have imposed on it. So it is in Iran's best interest to be able to make the most of this partnership, its new partnership, its membership in BRICS. I mentioned earlier there is something called the New Development Bank, the so-called BRICS Bank, headquartered in Shanghai. The various BRICS members can help the Iranian economy in various ways. So I would think that it is in Iran's best interests to work with these new BRICS partners in a way that helps it in its own economic challenges. So I wouldn't say that is, that should be a major concern. And if I may add, a footnote on a related subject that was broached before, what I would argue also is on the broader issue of the rise of the global south that we have seen in the course of the past couple of years, is that what we are also seeing is the rise of what me and my colleagues in a new book have called the rise of an active non-alignment, which is a variation on the non-alignment of the 50s and 60s that adjusts this perspective to the realities of the 21st century, that includes this wealth shift from the North Atlantic to the Asia Pacific. Some people talk about this being an Asian century. And in this perspective, this active non-alignment perspective is coming along with great force. As I said earlier, in the case of the war in Ukraine, we have seen this. A number of South American countries were asked to provide weapons to Ukraine by the United States and by Germany. Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, they all refused to do so. Why should they become parties to a war in which they have no interest? And we've also seen it in the position of, say, African countries, not just in relation to the Ukraine war, but also in the case of Gaza, with South Africa taking its concerns to the International Court of Justice, and also across Asia. So it seems to me we are moving towards a very different international situation in which there is, in many ways, a rebirth of non-alignment, but in a new incarnation, what we call active non-alignment. And I would say that India, yes, India calls it multi-alignment, but in the end, it's not a question of nomenclature. It's a question of the position you take, in which you refuse to automatically align yourself with the great powers and say, we stand on our own feet. And that, it seems to me, is what this new version of non-alignment, active non-alignment, is all about.
Thank you very much. Very, very clear. Thank you. If there is any question from the public, please let us know. Oh, there. Is there, sorry, there is the microphone there.
What about the Cotton Road? Nobody talked about that. Is the way of penetration of India in Europe in antagonism with the Silk Road.
I don't know, is there anybody who wants to answer? Because I suppose that nobody speaks about that because it's not particularly an important topic. Oh, sorry, please.
Do you want me to say something in the legal time?
Yes, Ms. Kripalani. Yes, please.
Okay, terrific. This is really the right question to ask. So you're right. India is stepping out onto the global stage for the first time, and we are now being we really want to focus on our economic growth, but we're being compelled to take these positions in these ongoing hot and cold wars. So India has chosen neutrality, but there are competing pressures from China. And so we're forced to take sides when it comes to China. And therefore, for the first time, we have agreed to participate in a multinational infrastructure project to compete with the Belt and Road. And that project is AIICP, or the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. It is an area that India knows very well through its centuries of trade. And also part of it runs through the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific, which is the Indian Ocean. Now, where Europe comes in, the corridor will meet Europe in the Mediterranean. And that is an area that Italy knows very well. So that ancient connectivity of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean is now going to be revived within the modern strategic interest of both our two countries. And the Italian Navy, we had a long visit with the Italian Navy quite recently, and they called it the wider Mediterranean. They're quite willing to engage, even though your Navy is quite small, is to engage in this larger region. And it is critical that that happen for order and stability and cooperation in this region. It needs the global north to cooperate with the global south, And India and Italy can here set the right example. So you talked about Mr. Maloney and Mr. Modi, and I'm sure you all know that the social media describes the good chemistry between both our leaders as Melody, which is Maloney and Modi. So I think that corridor is a really good example of European and Indian cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions from the public? Here, there is one. Oh, Professor. It's coming.
Thank you. Just a question on the cultural perspective. One often reads about Narendra Modi having in mind a vocation in India as a Hindu state, as a Hindu nation. I fail to understand how this could be true, given the presence of a strong minority, Islam minority, but also given the fact that the India, through vocation, so to speak, should be very close to a tolerant, a multicultural. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ronaldo. Anybody wants to answer, Ms. Kripalani or Mr. Joshi?
Yeah, I'm going to just say a quick word and Manoj can follow up. So what we are really having in India just now, I'm glad you brought up that question. You know, like Ambassador Jorge Heine called us a civilization, and that's correct. Like Italy, India is a civilization. We have history, we have epics, we have mythology, we have classical languages, culture, and our many multiple faiths have deep roots. But like Italy, India has also had invasions and colonization very early. We both had Islamic colonizations. And I think what is happening is that, again, going back to young India, with no memory of any of this, it takes pride in and it is seeking a rejuvenation of this cultural core. And so what you see is India undergoing the process of a decolonization of several centuries. It's an Indian Renaissance, much like the Italian Renaissance. And this is viewed by many in the West in a very hostile manner. But those in the global South who have similar experiences are looking at this with quite a lot of interest. So I would say that the media, particularly the Western media, has not bothered to understand really what is going on in the Indian mind and looked at history. You know, according to them, history began in 1992.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Joshi, do you want to add something?
All I'd like to say is that, Mr. Modi does represent a political party which has a strong, which what we'd say is not Hindu, but Hindutva, meaning Hindu-ness, meaning they emphasize Hindu-ness. And that has been the central approach of the party, and it has been remarkably successful. It's essentially a political organization, and that political organization has been remarkably successful in all these years, and that has taken Mr. Modi to greater and greater political heights. And as he enters the election now for his third term, everyone is saying that he is probably going to sweep. And in great measure, it will be because of the Hindutva movement.
Okay, thank you. No.
Is it working? Yeah.
Would you like to wrap up?
No, well, I will make a comment and perhaps wrap up in the end.
Yes, you should.
The comment on this is actually quite interesting. The point on, I think that the richness of a country is based on its diversity, the richness of its experiences, and that is what makes a country great. I noted with what Manjeet Kripalani made a comparison with Italy. Well, I beg to say that we would differ in our perception there. I think we consider Italy being a country with a great history, not because of its Roman heritage 2,000 years ago, but because of the summation of Arab, Spanish, French, and other, not invasions, but presence. I mean, Europe is a continent of come and go. People have come and left. And this is what made our entire culture. So we cannot separate one element from the other, I think, in order to define the true nature of Italianness. The nature of Italianness, the Italian identity, lies in its diversity. Now, I appreciate that in Mr. Modi's perception there is a differences. I mean, every view is respectable, but I think we need to accept the fact that we are on a different line on that, since we believe that diversity enriches the country rather than the other way around. And this is a point which I think may be of interest to us. I am in great difficulty in wrapping up a debate which has been extremely interesting and which has confirmed in my view that we're living in a confused international situation. The debate has gone, I mean, the Global South debate has been particularly interesting, at least to me. Jorge Heine says, we can't involve ourselves in Ukraine because that's a European war and it's not a global war. Well, the war is European, but one may agree or disagree. But the point is, do you violate or not internationally recognized borders? I mean, can you modify borders through violence? You may decide this is true. You may decide that there are reasons for this violation, whether justifiable or not. But that is the point. So this is not a regional point, it is a global point. And it goes down, the whole discussion goes down to the point in what is the difference between North-South, Global South, East and West? Well, I think we are all orphans here of the old days. In the old days it was much easier because you were either on one side, you were on the other side. And again, it was a very rough definition. You were either for individual rights and individual freedoms and you were on one side, or you were for collective rights and collective rights, and you were on the other side. That ended, of course. That ended, and then in the old days, there was also a third dimension, which is the one which has come to the fore now. There was another group of countries, the so-called third world countries, who were allowed to partake of the East or West in a subordinate way, plus a grey zone which had in India its main porter. And that was the third world, the non-aligned group. You could either partake of, if you did not partake of East and West, you could say you were non-aligned, you would sit on the sidelines as a receiver and not as a protagonist of the international order. Now the whole Global South discussion turns this on its head, because it aims to present the division, the North-South division, as the new norm of international relations. But how does that gel with the tradition of power confrontation? I mean, we are facing not a North-South power confrontation, we are facing a new dimension of East-West power confrontation, which doesn't go to Europe anymore, maybe it goes to China. So all this is very much annoying. But having said all this, and one point which I would like to take back, I don't know if you agree with this or not, is that in fact India has so far shown a very interesting model. Not being an ally with anybody and trying to be a reluctant partner sometimes with everybody, has provided this country a way out of alignments. And we're now in a situation where we are not aligned, or rather we are seeking to become aligned globally somewhere, but we don't know how, and we don't know where. And India, having had a foreign policy which has never taken partners, but has used its position in order to maximize its advantage, has so far been very successful and is still successful. Will it be in the future? As alignments come to the fore again, to put it in a very sort of blunt way, we may not, but if we will come to a situation where the poles will be the Euro-Atlantic side on one side and China on the other, how will China be able to not be allied but part of everybody, with China being one of the two poles? I mean, I think that what is interesting, what I think, I may be wrong, but I think this debate has shown is that we are through a phase of great confusion in which we are far from a solution, but we do know that something else will have to come in the place of what we've had so far, but we don't know what it is.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Everything is flowing. Thank you to everybody here. Thank you in particular from the panelists, from Boston, of course, but particularly from India, that now is quite late there. It is 11:30 in the evening. Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Va bene.